Well, welcome back into the Pressing On podcast, season two. I have the privilege of visiting with my friend Melissa McQueen today. Melissa, thanks so much for joining the Pressing On podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. You're doing great work.
Likewise, for all of our listeners that are tuning in right now, Melissa McQueen's the president and co-founder of Transplant Families. And so a like-minded organization that their mission is to unite families who have children with solid organ or bone marrow transplant by providing inspiration, support, and education. So we really appreciate you taking some time and look forward to hearing your story today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Why don't we go ahead and begin with just getting to know you personally? Tell us a little bit about your family, where you grew up, maybe some educational experiences that shaped you.
Absolutely. This, I had to think back a little bit for this question. Have been quite the journey that I've gone on. I was born in Oklahoma, lived in Panama for a few years. That's where my dad's from.
Oh, wow.
He met my mom in college, so they got married, and it obviously had a family, great
Sure.
parents. We lived in Texas for a while, and then we moved to Arizona when I was in high school. Um, and I've had a long-term interest in coding and tech ever since I was 11. I've loved it. I got my first computer and started coding right away, my old Atari 3600, which probably ages me far more than I want.
I love it. That's awesome.
And so that inspired me to go on to college and get my degree in computer engineering. That's where I met my husband. He was going to school there as well. And I got to work right away. I got my first internship in aeronautics, which was amazing. I loved working. I loved programming, all kinds of things. I got to program airplanes. I moved on into banking. I've done utilities, like power company kind of things,
Yeah.
all kinds of interesting, fun, exciting things. And then we started to work on our next dream, which is our family. And when we had first child was great. My oldest, Alex, wonderful. And 2 years later, we were blessed with my daughter, Maddie. And then a year after that, we were surprised, thankfully, very gratefully, with my son, Dylan. And that's surprised in more than one way, as you know.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I'd love to get into, Dylan's story a little bit as well, because, the thing that we do, with the Pressing On podcast is we want to amplify voices of perseverance. And you're very well respected in the transplant community, and obviously have started an organization that we'll get into that story in a little bit too. But I'm sure that it didn't come without some grief and loss and trauma. And the before, during, and after of the transplant journey is the real deal. So can you describe what those early days were like when you realized, oh my goodness, like Dylan needs a transplant?
Oh, you honor me with your words first off, and thank you so much. Yes, we knew something was wrong right away when we were in labor and delivery with Dylan.
Hmm.
The nurses were kind of acting differently. His oxygen was jumping around, and when he was born, he was blue and listless, and they kind of
Oh,
whisked him
wow.
away immediately. So this was a shock for us. We had all of the late term prenatal care, ultrasounds, genetic testing, everything, and we had no clue what was about to befall our family.
Hmm.
Um, when that happened, we kind of waited in that empty room with the bassinet, like, what's going on? And then that's when we met our first pediatric cardiologist. He came in the room and told us our son had cardiomyopathy, which is an enlarged heart. Um, and it was very enlarged for him. He was
Hmm.
struggling and he needed to be life flighted to the Children's Hospital right away. So that's what happened. He was life flighted to Phoenix Children's. My husband followed. I said, go with the baby.
Hmm.
I will stay here." That's what happened. Um, I got there eventually to the hospital when I was discharged. In that time he coded. They had to bring him back to life. It was
Wow.
terrifying. Um, and we didn't think he'd make it past the week, much less be here today. Um,
Wow.
when you figure out your child is an organ failure and they're not responding, it's so scary, especially with two other young kids. We were just kind of
Hmm.
assuming we would just bring him home. It would be this big happy family, and it was not that at all. Our doctors were hopeful that they could manage him with medical interventions and medicines, and they did for a long time. They were able to
Mm.
get him semi in an okay state, but still, we talked to our first transplant coordinator when he was 3 days old, saying there is a
Wow.
possibility of life flighting him out of the state because we didn't have a transplant center here at the time.
Wow.
Luckily, he got better a little bit. So we did this back and forth shuffle in the hospital. But at 6 months, we knew he was not doing well. He had a 6% ejection fracture, which a normal person has 55.
Wow.
So his heart was very enlarged and not pumping efficiently. And we knew that our only solution was transplant at that point. So we started searching out transplant centers.
Wow. Well, before we kind of like get into the timeline and logistics of what transplant looked like for you guys, like take us into your emotions. And, there's a lot of families that are either in the hospital or they're approaching transplant before, during, and after. Like, as a mom, like in those early days in the hospital before transplant, when he was hospitalized, like, how did you cope? How did you feel? Maybe share with our listeners a little bit of what that was like for you.
I think all of us grieve a normal life that we are kind of expecting to have, a normal beginning for our child. Um, Sadness, depression,
Mm,
anger, all of the emotions. Why us? Why is this happening? So many little things that you just take for granted. Like, when you have your baby and they come in and they take that first photo of them, that doesn't
mm,
happen with our kids because they're afraid that
right.
that might be the only photo that you get of them. So we were just numb, just in
Mm,
shock. Um, I, I've talked to many others, and I know they feel the same way. Um, you just don't know what's going to happen next. So you're definitely reduced to living in this very moment, which in
mm,
itself is a gift. You don't realize it at the time. But looking back, it forces you to be in the here and now and to rely on everything that you have, your support network, your faith, everything.
yeah. Yeah. Living in the moment. That's a good word. As far as like what the timeline looked like, was he discharged from the hospital? What did that look like to get listed for transplant? How quickly did that happen for Dylan? Walk us into that portion of the story.
Well, after doing this back and forth shuffle, like coming home, going back to the hospital, and them saying, hey, like it's time. This started when they said it's time, and he was 6 months. It was around Thanksgiving. Um, it took a little longer for us to be listed because, we were trying everything. And God bless our team. They were wonderful. They were really good to try all these interventions before we actually took that leap.
Mm-hmm.
But when it happened, of course, we had to go out of state. So I worked with my transplant coordinator. She was wonderful, Nurse Pfeiffer, and she's still a dear friend of the family. And she said,
Awesome.
hey, here's this list of places. You pick where you go. Your only kind of boundaries are your insurance. What's a center of excellence? What does this look like? So she gave me
Mm-hmm.
a list. I went through. We decided on Children's Medical Center in Dallas. I have a lot of family out there. They were very
Mm,
responsive right away when we sent the records. I jumped on a Southwest flight with my baby boy who was now at 3% ejection fracture, terrified that he wasn't going to make it through the flight. We landed, we got right there. We almost immediately started evaluation. He was
wow.
inpatient right away because he was so sick.
Wow.
But the staff there was wonderful, getting us listed and walking us through the process very kindly. Just amazing people, and you don't realize how many people it takes to save each one of these babies' lives, and how many people
Wow.
are in the process of this.
Mm-hmm. So what was the date of Dylan's transplant?
Well, we all never forget that day, right?
We don't.
He, we don't. I got the call. It was January 13th,
Okay.
2009. And so, yep, we were hoping, we're like, oh gosh, maybe you sit in the hospital and you'll hope for all these milestones. Maybe he'll be a Christmas baby. Maybe he'll be a New Year's. It's almost like when you're pregnant and you're waiting for this child to be born, when's it going to
Hmm.
come? But, with this time, it takes some family, going through their worst moments. So you
Hmm.
definitely hyper aware of what's happening and what it takes to get there. So you're constantly praying, dear God, if something befalls another family, please have them know about the gift of life and what that means
Hmm.
for another family. We would never pray for anything awful to happen to anyone else.
Absolutely. Hmm.
But, we say, we know things happen. If this happens, please, let them know. And I'm glad that another family said yes. We got the call January 13th, and it was midnight, I think, when I got the call. I called my
Mm.
husband immediately. I said, hey, he's in Phoenix still, right? Keeping our
Yeah,
insurance
sure.
afloat. And so,
Hmm.
like, hey, get the first flight out. Today is the day. And so he has a cousin that works at Southwest, was able to call her and get booking in the middle of the night
Awesome.
out here. And, things move. It's amazing how things move in a situation like this. So I went down to prep with him. Our nurse said, drive carefully, don't speed, because we had an apartment nearby at the time.
Hmm.
And so I got down there and was able to get Dylan prepped for surgery. It's quite a long surgery. And
Hmm.
my husband wheeled in right as he was coming out from surgery. They kind of let us peek in, and we could see for the first time ever his skin wasn't gray and sallow, it was pink.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that's what happens with a lot of these heart kids because, they don't have oxygen when they're kind of waiting for that heart. And when they finally do, it's a completely different kid.
For his transplant, how long was the surgery?
It was 5.5 hours.
Yeah.
His surgeon, Dr. Gulasarian, amazing. She wrote a book, Surgery in Heels, I think. Check it
Oh,
out.
wow.
She's an
Yeah.
amazing person.
Awesome.
And his scar is perfect to this day. Um, I think she uses plastic surgery technique. It's a straight
Okay.
line. You can barely see anything
Wow.
ever happened. Although he will still tell you a cool war story or two if you ask him because he's 16 and all those are cool now. So,
That's awesome. Yeah, we've got our scars, that's for sure. What are
mhm.
what are some of the toughest things like that maybe the average person that their family hasn't gone through a transplant? What are some of the toughest things that you deal with during a transplant journey that maybe the general public doesn't know or doesn't understand? Is there anything that comes to mind for you?
Oh, a ton. We had some incredible family members that stepped up and helped during this time. I had 3 kids, 3 and under. So
Mm,
we had a lot going on at the time. Um, Tough things that you don't think about is how this is going to affect the family, your
mm,
finances, your mental well being, your marriage. Everything kind of is thrown into flux at that moment. Um, thank goodness we had a few key individuals that made our journey that much better. I like
mhm,
to call my stepmom and my angel stepmom, which I know seems counter, but it's what happened in our situation. She had just retired from teaching. My dad says, go help them. So she did.
mm,
She came up and she was able to watch my older two while I was in the hospital every day with Dylan. Otherwise, we would have had to keep our family apart. My husband stayed in Phoenix and he was able to, do all that, but I felt bad, having the entire family. I didn't want to miss my daughter's first steps and first
right.
words, and that's such a key point in time. So she was an angel of a human being, came and helped us. All my cousins, my aunts, my uncles came to visit. Everyone was so helpful.
Mm,
Just my mom's group back in Phoenix were sending us mail, every other week. They sent us one box with 150 hearts that said, we're here for
oh,
you. We're thinking of you. It's those things that make
yeah.
such a huge difference.
Oh, that's awesome. The focus on the sibling piece, that's so huge because I know during our transplant journey, our older daughter Olivia, who's 4 years older than Micah, we were constantly trying to think through and balance, like, okay, like, what can we be doing for her? I mean, how can we get somebody to not only pick her up from preschool, but invest in her and do some special things for her so that we're not just at the hospital, every day, from sun up to sundown. And when people would check in and they would say, hey, how's your older daughter Olivia doing? Like, that would mean the world to us, because it showed a lot of insight and wisdom that's like, yeah, this is affecting every single family member in a very different way. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Hey friends, I'm Reagan Reeder, co-founder of Pressing On, and I love providing leadership to the organization as we uplift, resource, and coach hospitalized families, many of whom are on the journey of pediatric transplant. This season of the Pressing On podcast is sponsored by our friends at CODA, the Children's Organ Transplant Association. You can look them up online at coda.org. CODA helps children and young adults who need a life-saving transplant by providing fundraising assistance and family support. They're the trusted leader in supporting transplant families financially for a lifetime. CODA has helped raise more than $125 million for transplant-related expenses since 1986 and have seen approximately 2,400 CODA patients transplanted successfully. CODA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so funds raised to help meet the needs of transplant patients are not considered income for families, and CODA's services are provided at no charge to transplant families. As the mom of a transplant recipient, I'd highly recommend their services because I've seen firsthand how CODA's compassionate care and financial guidance has helped our family since my daughter's transplant, before, during, and after her transplant in 2017. For more information on how CODA might assist your family financially on the transplant journey, head to coda.org. That's COTA.org.
You mentioned the sending of the hearts and family members that were present. Is there anything specific that sticks out to you? And maybe this could be a word to a family member or a friend of somebody that's in the hospital. But are there specific things that you might recommend to folks that's like, hey, if you want to help somebody who's currently in the hospital right now, here's a few practical things either that you've seen people do or you've experienced yourself that are like, that was really helpful to me.
Absolutely. Kind word, calling. I know some of my very closest friends and family, I was kind of hurt at times because I didn't hear from them. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not, later on, you can go back objectively and see it's not because they don't care, they don't love you. It's because they're as terrified as you are and they don't know how to deal with it. So if I'm
Mm-hmm.
giving advice to anyone, it's, um, understand that everyone is going through this trauma with you in their own way. It's hard to see that in the moment, but forgiveness goes a long way. But if you do want to help, even sending a card, send a cheesy card, so, send a text, anything. Like those are the moments that help tremendously. We can't do much in the hospital, but we can do that. I want to go back for a minute for what you said about siblings,
Yeah.
because I know there's been a lot in the news lately about glass children and
Mm-hmm.
kind of how that works and how they're looked through and seen through with this one child that needs so much, and it's not their fault, it's just the way it is. And
Mm-hmm.
I agree, it takes a village. So our very wonderful psychologist at Children's Medical Center said, just even an hour a day, like it means the world to these kids, like you don't have to give your everything, but you do have to give something. And that
Mm-hmm.
was so impactful for us. We made sure that the other kids were always included, always had their own special moments. To this day, I have like a lunch, even though they're all teenagers. I'm like, you get your lunch, separate of everyone else, where it's just me and you and we talk. I definitely want to learn from others who have been there and want to have our children seen.
No, that's really, really great because, everybody in the family is affected in a different way. And we all have holistic needs, right? Physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, intellectual. And those needs don't stop just because of siblings in, the hospital and stuff like that. Um, Take us into what post-transplant looked like for you all. I know, many that listen to the podcast, for some of them, transplant is a cure. For some of them, transplant lessens the effects of the disease that they have, like my daughter, Micah. what did the transplant, how did it affect Dylan? And then what did recovery look like for him in the weeks and months and years to follow?
Right. As we all know, transplant's the sprint and the recovery is the marathon. And so it's it was a long journey to get where we are. I think it's a credit to these children, not only resilience, which I think we hear a lot, but sometimes it becomes a word that doesn't, it's much more than resilience, it's
Hmm.
perseverance. It's just their ability to keep going, even though everything hurts for them and it's hard. And so we
Hmm.
saw Dylan, he didn't get the normal milestones that everyone else got. He didn't eat right away. He didn't sit up. He didn't do tummy time. So we had to go into physical therapy and speech therapy and occupational therapy and feeding therapy. And it took years to get him to where
Wow.
he needed to be. So short term, you have the him recovering from the transplant. He's got all this energy. He's a happy baby. We have videos of him just rocking back and forth, and he's just so happy to be feeling good. It's something he's never felt before.
Hmm.
But now he's got to do all these other things. So he's like, oh, well, that's great, but now I have to have a feeding tube to eat. And, he's, looking around. He can't articulate that as a baby, but he can see that his
Yeah.
brother and sister don't have one. And so it's a lot more that kind of went into it. So there are two journeys there. Thankfully, Dylan's an amazing fighter. And as many of these kids are, I would say all of them are. And he's taken that resilience and perseverance that he used for learning to eat and walk and
Hmm.
crawl and talk and to get him up to speed in school. And now he's a champion athlete. I just would have never have
Wow.
expected, but it makes sense, right?
That's awesome.
uh,
That's
these
awesome.
kids, all they've been through, they're like, of course they're used to pushing it a little extra harder
Right.
and doing a little bit more, right?
Uh-huh. Man, that's amazing. Share with everyone like what sports does he play? You just said championship athlete, but like what does that look like for him? What are the things he's into now?
Oh, we're so proud of him. He has explored everything. So, he has played football. He switched from football to swim for fall. But his school was the state champion last year for football. So they weren't easy on him
Wow.
either. He was out
Wow.
practicing in 100-degree heat for 3 hours a day. He never complained, not once.
Wow.
Stayed with it, was healthy the entire time. I want to precursor this by saying that's not for everyone. Of course, check with your
Sure.
transplant team and get
Sure.
that approval. But his transplant team did give him encouragement every step of the way. They're like, just be mindful, work out like you're supposed to, listen to your coaches, eat well, take your medicine, do the things you're supposed to do. His best sport that he's been doing since third grade was wrestling. He got third in the state for junior varsity last year.
Wow.
So he loves a medal. He loves to compete. And he's been a part of so many things. He also did track. So, and he just loves being with his teammates. He loves improving himself. He loves going out there and competing.
That is amazing. I mean, that's such an encouragement because I talk to so many parents and families that they have these questions in the weeks and months to come. Will my child ever be able to, fill in the blank, whether it's, swim or play a sport or speak, in a certain way. Like there's just so many, like you just said, like that resilience factor that maybe it's an overused word, but like these kids grow and develop in ways that we could not even imagine, like in the days and months after transplant. So if anybody is listening right now and is wondering, could my kid possibly play a sport, even like a rough sport like football? Dylan's a living, breathing example. Like that's an amazing accomplishment right there.
Well, thank you. We're so proud of him, honestly. And so is his donor family. They're a big football family as well. And they have
Oh
sent
wow.
him many a running shoe while all this is going on. They see their son in him all the time, and they're happy to cheer for him as well.
That is so cool. Now for, a lot of families that go through trauma in the hospital, the emotional highs and lows of the transplant journey, that's enough responsibility for a lifetime. But, part of the story that I'd love to get into right now is at some point in time in your journey, you were like, hey, let's start an organization. And I think that we have a similar, bone in our body as well, that, people looked at us like we were a little bit crazy when we were like, you just got home and just got stable. Like, what are you trying to do? But walk us into that journey of where that idea for transplant families came. How did it develop? I'd love to hear a little bit of the story of how Transplant Families came to be.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think we came at this from two very wonderful directions, and which is great. My background being engineering, I tinker, I try to fix things, I analyze, I solve problems. That's what I love to do. I've loved to do it ever since I was a child. And so when I got home, I'm sitting there, we're finally able to kind of recover, finally able to breathe. And I'm like, you know what? If I have to watch one more hour of kids television programming, I might like scream. So I love my kids, but I just popped out. I'm like, I'm going to get out my laptop. While we're watching some Sesame Street, I am going to do some research. And so
Sure.
I did a full analysis of kind of what was going on with Dylan. Every frustration we encountered, I knew
Mhm.
probably other people were frustrated too. So I started to do research and ask the questions that I think we all ask, will he be okay? What is, like, what are the milestones for feeding therapy? How are we going to get there? I just kept asking those questions. And when I was doing research, I'm like, I'm just going to throw this on a website. And
Mhm.
so I had the website. It started getting very, very popular. And we started a support group out here in Phoenix. And we quickly, they're like, okay, this is going to become a transplant family support group. I'm like, great. And this is kind of the train starting to roll. And I started talking to other people in other areas of the country. We started to chapter out, and then COVID hit. And
Mm.
so we became kind of a very small community within a nation very quickly. Of course, with that, we had been working with several different physician groups at the time because that's where it led us, the research and kind of our company. We were incorporated in 2017, and we started working with these learning groups of pediatric transplant physicians to say, hey, we parents have a lot of questions. Do you want to help us with that? And they
Mhm.
said, of course. So that timing lined up really well. When COVID happened, we were able
Mhm.
to say, we're not getting any guidance. This is all guidance for adults. Where is the guidance for kids? And I think that's
Right.
where I met your wife for the first time. Is we're
Yeah.
like, what are we going to work on for these kids, like in their IEPs and 504s when they're going into
Mhm.
school? Them
Yep.
getting sick is something completely different from any other child getting sick. And so
Mhm.
that's where the train really started rolling. We were able to continue to have a forum for not just transplant families leadership, but I want to encourage any family that wants to contact us. If you have a question about something, ask. Like we have access to hundreds of amazing minds, all these
Absolutely.
clinicians, and just ask them, and they will say, "Yeah, let's do a webinar. Yeah, let's do an infographic or a white paper. We want to know those answers too." So that's kind of
Mhm.
how we got started, how it evolved, and quickly grew into this. I can't take credit for it. It's definitely a village or community effort.
Oh, that is amazing. I appreciate you sharing that background. And I know our family's benefited personally. For those that are listening, definitely go to transplantfamilies.org to take advantage of a lot of the resources that Melissa's talking about. When I read your mission statement earlier, it ends by saying that you all provide inspiration, support, and education. One of the resources that I loved earlier this month was the back to school checklist of, various different things that's like, hey, have this conversation with your teachers. And I know my wife as a special ed teacher has written, various different things that are very similar of, hey, how can we help kids with different physical special needs? And how can we meet those, needs and help the families like interact with teachers in a positive way? Um, I'd be, I'd love for you to kind of share with our listeners maybe that inspiration, support, and education. Like, what are a few things that Transplant Families is doing that you're really proud of? What are a couple of things that you're like, I find most people say these are some of our most helpful resources. Give people a little feel for some of the resources and supports that you offer.
We're super proud of our Caregiver Connect. We have a monthly kind of gathering for anyone that needs it. It doesn't matter if you're listed and waiting, or if it's immediately after you have a baby, or if you have a teenager and they've lived their whole life with transplant. We've been fortunate to meet so many amazing people on these Caregiver Connects and just have a forum for them to just be open and speak. It's moderated by a social worker. So if you have a moment, and you really need any kind of professional help, we want that available, right there. Although we do not give medical advice, we do know where to point you in the right direction so you can get immediate advice if you need it for your mental wellness. We know this is a journey. We're very proud of that. We're very proud of the conference that we do yearly. We were so lucky. So us being the inquisitive group that we are, we went to Donate Life America and we're like, hey, there should be this awareness week. Like, our kids are pretty awesome, look at all they've
Hmm.
done. Let's make awareness for these transplant kids. And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. And so we were able to help them charter National Pediatric Transplant Week. It's the last week of April. It's so
Yes.
awesome. It's kind of that capstone for Donate Life Month.
Hmm.
And we're so very proud of that. So from that, we said, hey, let's just have a little conference to celebrate that week. So we have a conference that last Friday of that week, and we've produced almost 100 hours of content from that conference. And all of those sessions came from patients and families asking questions. And
Hmm.
we've had a few doctors present like, hey, a lot of my patients are asking this, and they've sent us things that we didn't even realize that were such a benefit. There was one that came from Seattle about visualizing kind of your future after transplant for teens and what that looks like, and what a positive impact that had, just visualizing a positive future and what that meant for them and their future for transition. So those are just a few things we've done. We've also gotten to work on some policy. A lot of us volunteer in
Hmm.
many, many different groups. And we were able to be co-signers recently on the Charlotte Woodward Act, which prevents discrimination against anyone with cognitive delays for
Yeah.
getting a transplant, which is amazing because every child's life is precious. And then also another thing we were very proud of is we were recent co-signers on the FAA Authorization Act, which helps organs travel in the front again, like they used to do before 9/11. But now we're getting kind of those safeguards in place again, where organs are given a priority on commercial flights.
That is amazing. That is amazing. I appreciate you sharing all of that, because I mean, my next question was going to be like, what are some things that you're seeing in the transplant community that you're excited about? And like, I could just see the excitement on your face just like bubble to the surface as you're talking about policy, because we need more people in the advocacy space, for families that are affected by transplant. So thank you and your team for the good work that you're doing. I'd love to shift back towards kind of the transplant journey as a whole. Um, as you've interacted in your organization and sat on numerous boards that serve transplant families and stuff like that, you've been able to observe a lot of families that are before, during, and after transplant. Could you maybe share with our listeners some things that you see that you're like, okay, this family is persevering well in the transplant journey? Like, what are some key characteristics or commonalities that you see among families that are persevering well in their transplant journey?
Yes. Um, those that communicate well with their team.
Mm,
Um, Definitely, I think to this and to the greater policy question, like approaching this objectively and with a certain amount of hope and faith that things will go well is very important. I know it's, super dark time. It's scary. It's terrifying, in fact. So it's hard to kind of walk in grace um,
mhm.
forward to see, hey, I've got these questions. Um, I need help. The families that I see that do the best are the ones that will be talking to the doctors constantly, asking
Mm,
questions, keeping notes on their phone, and then taking those notes to clinic and saying, we need to know about A, B, and C. And I have a message for the clinicians too. Some of the families that are the loudest and complain and are very, um, going hard on advocacy for themselves and their children, they make great advocates on lots of levels. So if you
sure.
see someone that's like, I'm frustrated with this process, great. That's an opportunity to get them involved in not only their own child's well-being and their family's well-being, but well-being on the state level or the national level. Take
Hmm.
that fire and let it go forward. I will go back to the policy question you asked just a minute ago, and this is a good example of that too. A lot of really great patient advocates and parents that were out there doing well for their children, asking the questions, can they go to camp? Can they play sports? Can they do all these things? And I'm like, oh my gosh, recently we had an opportunity to go to Capitol Hill and advocate for cell-free DNA testing. And so we did that, and a lot of those same parents who are involved in their child's well-being and them getting better said, I want to advocate for them to not have non-invasive tests too. So great. We went and did that. And recently it's been approved through Medicaid again and Medicare. So families spoke up. They let their wishes be known. And our children wrote letters that said, hey, we don't like being poked so much. If we will if we have to, but of
Sure.
course.
Yeah.
But if there's another way, if there's new technology and innovation, like let's try that too. So I'm really hopeful this opens the doors, these parent voices. Not only you're saving your child and you're being this fantastic example for your child, but you could change things for children everywhere and for the future of all our kids. Let's keep pushing and see the amazing innovations that happen from it.
Yes, say it louder for all the people in the back. I love that. Yeah, because as you advocate for your child, you're building up these muscles, these perseverance, these advocacy muscles that will not necessarily only benefit your child. They could benefit dozens and dozens and dozens and hundreds of children. And I think just, starting the organization Transplant Families is an example of that.
Hey everyone, I'm Olivia Reeder, and I love helping my parents serve hospitalized families through our Pressing On programs. Here at Pressing On, we're committed to meeting tangible needs, and we have various programs that help resource hospitalized families physically, emotionally, and spiritually, including our Hospital Care Package program, Transplant Backpack program, Gas Card program, Crisis Coaching program, and Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh program. So if you or a family you know is affected by a long-term hospitalization or is on the journey of pediatric transplant, we'd love to come alongside you with free resources during this time. Let me encourage you to visit our website at pressingon.org to sign up for our free resources or make a referral to one of our programs. Visit pressingon.org today. Thanks so much.
Towards the end of the interview with the podcast, we always do a rapid fire round. So are you ready for some rapid fire questions to get to know you personally, Melissa?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So first rapid fire question, what is the most beautiful place that you've ever been to on vacation?
I have to give it to my son. He picked Make-A-Wish and Disney cruise to the Bahamas was the most beautiful place I've ever seen. The crystal clear
Oh,
waters. Yeah, gorgeous.
nice. Which Disney ship did you guys go on for that cruise?
We were on the Dream and it
Oh,
was,
nice.
and we actually got to go back and recreate the whole like Make-A-Wish experience. We saved up the money and we wanted to do it later when he was a teenager so he would remember it. But between the two, and we did the same photos like, oh, look, it's us. And we sent them all back to Make-A-Wish and they got a big kick out of that too.
That is awesome. I love that. Favorite snack that can always be found at your house?
Oh gosh. I'm a chocolate girly myself, but my family are popcorn fanatics. My husband
Ooh.
buys it by the case, and they call it the Ches popcorn, and they eat it like almost nightly. So they are all it's a McQueen addiction, popcorn in our house.
Okay. That's awesome. It reminds me of my girls, like my daughter Micah, who has a rare genetic disease, and the transplant lessened the effects of that. But they told us when she was on day 3 of life, hey, with her, you know, methylmalonic acidemia, like she's gonna love salty carbs. And we were like, okay, how do you know that? Well, here we are 9 years later, and all she wants to do is pop popcorn every single night and put tons of salt on it. So we hear you. The readers are eating popcorn as well, just about every single night. So, um, kind of a more serious rapid fire question, but I love to ask all the people on the Pressing On podcast, and you shared a little bit of this earlier, but what does the word perseverance mean to you?
Never giving up.
Mm,
Um, and when you feel like you're going to fall face down or you're going to drown in that lake of despair, um, leaning on your people around you, whoever that is, you don't know who it is. Like, there have been days where it was the cleaning lady in my hospital room who was sitting
mm,
talking with me and listening to me while I cried. You just leaning on anyone who will listen to you. There are people out here who love and care about you. Persevering is knowing that and being in that love and joy
mm.
that comes eventually with the process of this gift of life.
That is beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, in closing, I'd love for you to share, maybe some resources that have been helpful to you in your journey. And we definitely want to continue to say to folks that are listening, go to transplantfamilies.org. But what specifically has been encouraging to you during your, transplant journey, whether it's a book or a podcast or an article, or maybe resources that you've now established on your website as well? But what are some things that you could point families that are affected by transplant towards?
Definitely come to Transplant Families. It's transplantfamilies.org. Our socials, Transplant Families for most of them. I think on X, we're Transplant Fams. But yes, go there. There's over 100 different partner organizations, Pressing On being one of them.
Sure.
And you can see all of them. We have camps, we have scholarships, we have learning networks that you can join. They all need help. These clinician groups, they want the patient voice involved.
Mm,
Please get on there. You got to sign on and make an account with us, but that's only, we don't ever spam or do anything like that. It's just to kind of know who our families are and keep a very protective, safe space for transplant families specifically. Another great resource, besides, of course, Transplant Families and Pressing On, is CODA. You definitely want to go to their website immediately. Rick, their president, is the nicest man you'll ever meet. And hopefully you do get to meet him. He goes out to all the hospitals and talks to all the different teams. They have been such a help for our family. During when we had to travel, they covered many of those expenses, and
mhm.
they have their program set up in such a way so it's not a burden to the family. They have people that will help you in your community get those funds set up so you don't have that financial burden when you're struggling with everything else. My last resource is the one that's closest to you. It's your transplant team. They are there to
Yes.
help you. They love seeing you succeed. So stay curious and keep asking questions, and they're there to help you through every step of the way.
Well, Melissa McQueen, president and co-founder of Transplant Families, this has been a really insightful and hopeful and helpful conversation. So thank you for all that you do, and we really appreciate you joining the Pressing On podcast.
Oh, thank you, Richie, for having me. It's such an honor to be here, and keep up the great work. Love what you and Reagan are doing.
Thank you so much.